Hi, I'm Michael Joy. Welcome to another reaction video. Today, we have one of my favorite topics. It is ponds. Koi ponds, recreational ponds, and things like this. Currently, I don't have a pond, but I grew up, my stepfather had a pond in front of the house, and it was fantastic. This story that I'm going to tell today ties into, I tried to build a pond, and what didn't go well with it. And I found this guy's video among the hundreds and hundreds of videos that I've watched. And I really like him, even though his voice at first sounded a little like not so interesting. He has so much knowledge, and I really enjoy watching his straightforward. And he's got this little film noir aspect, like I'm watching a crime film. So let's see this here. This is pretty neat. I'll weave in my story about I almost bought a professional pond builder's home with their 1-acre pond. That's coming up. Here we go.
Over 7 years ago, I initially kept my goldfish in a 55-gallon aquarium. Goldfish are one of my absolute favorites, but more specifically the ones with natural body shapes, the common and comet varieties. They're beautiful, graceful, extremely personable, and make great pets. However, they get quite large and prefer to live in groups, and thus require...
He's right. I had 2 goldfish, Red and Artie, and they started out this big, and then I had this little aquarium, and I kept getting bigger and bigger as they grew. Oh man, it's a lot to care for 2 goldfish. It gets kind of expensive, so I like this pond idea, even a small ornamental one.
A lot of space. A large aquarium or stock tank can work, but an outdoor pond is the most appropriate option. I always intended to keep mine in a pond long term, but it wasn't something I'd do until I got my own home in 2018. That's where I painstakingly made the original DIY pond. I had to dig it.
They say the type of pond that's the most expensive is the one you have to build twice, you know, like any contractor story. And the other thing is when people build a pond, about 10 minutes later, they wish they'd built it twice as big, 3 times as big, 5 times as big, the whole yard. This is how addictive this is.
Twice, it was overbuilt and not optimized, but it functioned flawlessly once complete. For 3 years, not only did I enjoy this pond, but the fish thrived within it. They bred and overwintered with several others that I added. That said, it all ran much longer than intended. Not that I thought it would fail, but I wanted to replace it with something larger as early as 2020. Thankfully, various circumstances stopped that from happening. Allow me to explain. Building my first pond was a lifelong dream come true. Shortly after I built it, though, I became friends with the folks at Aquascape.
Okay, here's where the story begins. The folks at Aquascape, I was mesmerized with their videos, and the guy on the right, Greg, owned a home that I was considering buying, and he had this beautiful backyard that, and I have lots of pictures we'll upload, and he lived in that house for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, and over the years, he used it as his laboratory. The thing is a lab house, he had like, at the time, I don't know, hundreds of employees, and it was very successful, and he had people he could just throw at the pond, so to speak. Oh, let's dig this ditch. Oh, let's do this, that, and the other. And inside the house, because his pond came right up to the edge, they had this very sophisticated sump pump system. I think that clearly over the years he learned more about the ponds, but this is the company that I called out to my house, and I'll tell you what happened in a minute.
And only weeks later I ended up with a second pond in my front yard. All of this really gave me the pond bug, and I've continued building them ever since.
It's not that fast. 2 weeks. I think if you have 1 million subscribers, the pond guy will come out and help build a pond at your house. For me, when I booked them, they told me it was $500 to send somebody out to the house in order to view the land and to give an estimate. And then it takes a couple weeks to schedule them. So I scheduled the appointment, I prepaid my $500, and this guy named Brian came out, extremely knowledgeable. I showed him 3 projects that I was interested in. Even just walking around, he had some really good advice, and I thought, oh, this is a very valuable visit. And part of the deal was following that they create an estimate for you. The thing is this is where the fail happened. I never received the estimate. I kept calling and calling and calling. I called the company, I called his assistant, all this stuff, and they finally ran out of excuses, and they just stopped returning my call.
Hello, this is Kitty.
I kept calling and calling and calling. I called the company, I called his assistant. And I was like, damn it, I paid $500 to get a quote for a pond and was really not impressed. After I had looked at this guy's house and I thought, wait a minute, what's up with the pond builders, you know? Well, they're busy, but come on, I have means to build a beautiful, beautiful pond, and I didn't feel the love.
I had a very specific idea in mind for the DIY pond redo that Ed the pond professor was going
He's
to help
great.
me with. In fact, he came to my house to plan it out.
But he's $1,500 an hour is what I was told. Because I said, oh, can Ed build this? And they said, no, he only does commercial projects. What they don't tell you is that the Aquascape has a very large company that they sell all these materials to, but they also train landscapers how to build ponds. So they have these training seminars where they're going to build a pond, and they invite all these vendors out, landscapers, to come build the pond, and they learn. It's a great application of teaching because you're right on site, and that's what happened here, you'll see.
And we intended to build it in 2021. There was an issue though. My house was just becoming too small to properly run Serpa design. I didn't want to waste time and money if I'd be moving soon, so we scrapped it altogether. That brings us to the summer of 2022, where my wife and I found a home that would fit the specific requirements of Serpa design. The second I saw the backyard, I knew it needed a proper water feature, something similar to what Ed and I discussed years before. We began planning again immediately.
I think pond building just takes patience, because there's the desire to do it, and then once I understood what it was going to take, I thought, well, I want a pool also, and then I want the pool and the pond, and then they'd make these swimming ponds, and I slowed myself down. I thought it was going to be like you come in, you dig a hole, you throw a liner in, and it's not quite that simple, to say the least, but it does take some planning. And I would say if you're someone who's going to build a pond and you think it's going to run itself, really watch a few hundred hours of YouTube before you commit your house to this kind of thing and find out vacationing is dangerous to your koi's health. Ponds require a lot of attention, even though they say they don't.
And things came to a head in May of this year. Ed, along with Tim of Aquatic Edge, came to my house to finalize the vision for this design. We also went to a rock yard to hand pick the materials. Long ago, I knew I wanted to use sandstone
if you're near a rock yard, you're in good shape. Otherwise, you kind of got to take what somebody gives you.
because of its moisture-wicking properties, which makes it great for growing moss. And as you know, I love moss. Being able to select the stones we'd actually use was an awesome experience, and I forgot just how great they were until months later when they showed up.
So the other thing about pond construction that is sometimes talked about is access. That you have a nice backyard and you want a big feature, but they have to get trucks in and out to drop these rocks, to get all the equipment, excavation equipment in there. So you may be tempered in what you can build just on access alone.
Up at my house. But before I get ahead of myself, there was something else I had to do. I imagined the ponds being between these decks, but unfortunately they were in rough shape. Although the materials appear new, the foundation was bad, and most of the boards were warped from not being fastened properly.
So pond preparation is a big deal because he's having to now move a deck, and in some places you have to consider the drainage and the runoff that's coming into your future pond. And so, look, I'm not a pond expert. These are just things that I've learned from the videos that were like, oh man, I didn't think of that. And if I didn't know that before I asked somebody to build it, I get along and they're like, well, we built the pond. And I'm like, yeah, but my neighbor's yard drains into the pond and now I get all this kind of nutrients, pollution, contamination.
I reluctantly dismantled the whole thing and salvaged what I could.
That takes a moment.
However, in saying that, I don't see how we could have made this pond if I left them there. In the months leading up to this, I've been putting in well over 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. My hope was to get ahead with uploads so I could focus on the build while it happened. As you know, that didn't occur, and I've had to skip a few weeks because everything is taking longer and longer.
This guy's channel is dedicated. He's a super expert on plants and wildlife and things like this, but the pond construction, this scale is new to him, I think.
But I digress. I mention this because in the final days before it all began is when I dismantled the deck.
Okay. So what I noticed is when Brian came to see me at my house, one of the first most appropriate questions he asked is, where do you want the pond? And I told him where I wanted. He said, that's good. He said, let's go inside. And we went inside the house and he said, you need to be able to enjoy your pond from the inside also, from the viewership, you know, the window placement or where you sit and where you eat and where does the waterfall go, because we have 4 seasons in Illinois and I would like to keep an eye on things and enjoy the beauty of it through all seasons. So if you have land in one place but you can't see it from your house, well, it may be okay for some people, but it's just this beautiful part of looking out your window.
So even at the very start, I was already
He doesn't
burnt
have
out
big
by
windows.
this process. Hanging out with the dragon here to just try to get a little bit of peace for all of the chaos that's about to ensue. Planning for this has went on for well over a year, but the day has finally come. The day to break ground. I'm excited, nervous, stressed, all these different emotions because there's so many variables at play here, and you never know what's going to happen. Truly, you don't.
It's funny. When I look at his house, this is an outdoor guy, a nature guy. And to me, it looks like he's, oh wait, maybe this is the house he's moving out of. Anyways, I don't know, but I think about, my dad was a nature guy and he didn't really care about the inside of the house. He only cared about the outside of the house and the landscaping and seeing things thrive. And I'm seeing a drop ceiling in his house here and I'm like, wow, most people get rid of drop ceilings in residences pretty quick, but it's almost like it's not even a thing for him. It's outside. It's already started raining in this day, and I don't know if it's going to happen as we're building. I'm sure it will because you always get the obligatory water feature rain. I've yet to build one where it didn't. Anyway, all the contractors are going to be here soon, and things are being delivered and whatnot, so it's about to be crazy. And crazy it was. Excavators were rolling up the driveway through the rain. We marked the rough outline of the pond and began digging. It was so satisfying to finally see this happen, but from this moment forward, my backyard would never look the same. Even with the machinery, manual digging is unavoidable. You just can't do the detail work otherwise. We had to clean up the edges, remove loose areas of soil, and ensure the surfaces were all flat. See, there's different type of pond builders. There's a pond builder, a pond collaborator, and a pond buyer. I was a pond buyer, meaning I didn't want to dig with the shovel. I don't have the strength for it like these young guys do. And that's like, oh, just make the magic happen. This guy is like crazy. Why am I yelling? I love ponds. This original excavation only accounted for the first shelf though. After marking for the second, we continued. Typically I do this by myself, so it was crazy to see how quickly things happened with the 5 of us. And as you can imagine, we had a lot of dirt from the excavation. Luckily we needed more height in the back and used it to regrade the hillside. Things were going well, and just as we finished the initial excavation, it rained. We had to take a quick break, but the rain wasn't going to stop us. We just had to clean up the mess and refine the edge work. The filter also began taking shape, but it was getting late and the rain started picking up again, so we called it a day. It rained all through the night, so we had to clean up a lot of water and muck the next day. That's a lot of starting over. This made access for the excavation kind of sketchy, so they leveled out the berm in the back for better movement. Meanwhile, Trevor and I set the skimmer. We ensured it remained level as we backfilled around the edges. We also combed through to pick out roots and loose debris and tamped out the remains. See, if you're a pond buyer like me, you wouldn't know if your pond builder really cares. And all these little details that the homeowner cares about, and he's in there right with it, may get overlooked. You know, maybe somebody leaves a root there and it's going to puncture the liner. I don't know, but there's a lot to think about. The hole was finally ready for geotextile underlayment at this point, which we rolled up and transferred to the site. Although it took a few pieces to adequately line it, a quick pass with the heat gun allows you to join them together, making installation easier. This is to create a buffer between the dirt and the liner that's going on top. The big problem with this type of pond is they get water underneath the liner. The trick though is to ensure the fabric lays flat against the dirt. Next up was the EPDM liner. This is the waterproof part. It came in a single roll, making it easy to install. We just strapped it onto a pole and unrolled it over the hole. After removing the excess, we unfolded it accordingly. As before, we just ensured that it laid as flat as possible so nothing gets pinched. And as I'm sure you could tell, none of this is any different from what I've shown in past builds, it's just on a much larger scale. That said, we put another layer of geotextile over top of this. It will protect the liner from the weight of those massive boulders, which arrived just as we completed this. We pulled some of the smaller ones out first. They sell those by the pound, by the ton. These stones are large, have a lot of character, and some are already covered in moss. We couldn't add them just yet though. We addressed a few components in the intake bay first. Okay, you see this? What they're assembling here is aqua blocks. It's a branded name. They're basically plastic crates that create a volume underground that water, it creates an artificial reservoir for water, and yet it's structurally stable. Now, Aquascape sells all of the things that you see going into here, so of course they're going to brand these these little crates here, but really they take time to set up. They're expensive, and I don't think you need them per se. My recommendation to investigate, I'm not a pond builder, is milk crates. They stack nicely, or plastic pallets. You can get a plastic pallet for $5 or $7 and you can make this huge reservoir, structurally solid. This is just a money earner for the company, but there are benefits to it. But I'm like, when I said this to the pond builder that came out the second time, he kind of looked at me like, oh shit, that's a good idea. You know, like I'm not gonna get to make money on my aqua block sale to you.
Most of this space will be filled by these aqua blocks. We just had to add gravel to level them out. Another key feature was a block wall. This gravel foundation made it easy to level out the blocks.
It's a lot of manual labor.
And as we stacked them, we applied adhesive between them for stability. The primary purpose of this wall is to save space and to support overhang rocks. Once tall enough, we backfilled with gravel,
Nobody's wearing a back
which meant
brace.
we could finally add stones.
Or a hat.
I've never set boulders like this before, so I watched them do it for the first one. Then I helped set the next one and many throughout the project. The third and much larger rock gave us some challenges, but eventually we got it to sit properly. And to finish...
So this rock placement is where you need the experts, because the rock placement, these guys are like sculptors, and they can look at how a rock is going to handle the water. If you're building a waterfall, they know how the water is going to spill over the edge with the placement. That's the one part that I was like, man, it would be a total crapshoot for me if I tried to do that, even if I had contractors putting stones. That would be, you could mess up the whole thing by not having water move well.
Off day 2, we excavated a little more on the edge. The third and final day of the initial prep work began by moving one of the overhang rocks. This boulder is huge and was pushing the limits of the machine. With a lot of finagling though, we were able to get it moved to the pond. However,
you can see that if you don't have house access, this heavy equipment, what are they going to dump these rocks in your begonia garden? I mean, you got to have a place for staging, and not all neighborhoods have a good place for all the trucks that come with this. The excavator machine has a truck and a trailer that goes with it. These dump trucks have to have a place to stage. You need to have, also you have a bunch of staff over there. Whose toilet are they using? You know, is it yours? They're all in the mud. You need outhouses to, there's a lot of ancillary activity that goes with any construction project.
Size, we couldn't do a test fit, so I came up with the idea to make a paper template. This allowed us to determine placement, and more importantly, where to provide support. Bricks and gravel to be specific. After accounting for that though, we just weren't able to move the rock any further. And just as we admitted defeat on this one, the second round of stones arrived. Within them was an even larger boulder that, for whatever reason, Ed thought we could move.
See, for the pond guy in the back, I forgot his name already. He's just looking at this, I could tell, just like the kids' Legos, you know. This is his art. In addition to being like this mad PhD knowledge guy, he gets how to put stones. I wish I could have hired him.
Yeah, it's 10 feet tall. I'm saying no way. He says yes. We'll see.
I will admit that we were able to move it from this spot, but not very far. Defeated once again, we only had enough time to
Can you imagine dropping one of those rocks?
I wanted to include plenty of these, and for this one we used an extra length of centipede tubing. We cut it to size and concealed it with fabric, gravel, stones, and a large boulder. Finally, we filled the basin with gravel and didn't work on the pond.
So just for orientation, they told me my pond would be $180,000. I'll talk about that in a minute.
For a week. The theme of this pond was rain, and a lot of it. It may just appear like the basin filled, but this is actually mostly from displacement of water that ran under the line. After draining everything down, you can get a better look at this waterbed bubble. This is not ideal at all, but the intake bay also got ruined, so we had to dismantle all of that.
You got it.
Everyone's going to be here soon, so I'm going to get this thing drained down before they arrive so we're not wasting our time. The thing is, though, is that...
Do you see how many times they've taken a step forward and then there's a reconsideration? I think that's just normal for pond building, but the experts can at least jump through it. So if someone's going to build a big pond like this by themselves, and there's guys who can, they own the equipment and things, there's just a lot to look out for it. And mostly a self-pond builder is going to build one. How much could you learn with building one?
That as I've been looking at this for the past week, I'm getting kind of concerned with it, honestly. The thing is that once we start adding all these giant boulders in here, it's just going to get so small really quick. Basically the size of this middle area here, which I mean, what's the point of digging this giant hole if it's going to be so small? So I'm going to talk to them and we'll get that addressed, and we're just going to have to
Can you imagine? We built all this and now the hole's too small. This is tricky stuff.
pivot with the design.
I discussed the revisions I wanted to make with Ed before we got started, and we proceeded accordingly. That said, we still had to remove the water bubble, which was quite the process. We moved a rock and pulled back the liner to gain access to the water with a pump. Although filling a pond completely before a rainstorm would probably stop this from happening again, we added a drain for good measure. We dug a trench slightly below the depth of the pond, all the way back behind where the skimmer was. The trench houses a culvert and a PVC pipe that's surrounded by geotextile fabric and gravel. These elements, when combined with the sump pump, will pull groundwater from beneath the pond and my yard.
So if you're seeing this for the first time, you're like, what? But after watching a bunch of videos, it makes real sense. There's very simple things happening. You have to keep the groundwater out from underneath your pond because water goes into the ground and can go under it, and then it lifts the liner and it causes a lot of trouble. So you have to be able to drain, like your basement, drain the pond, and there's filtration and stuff like this. But
after shimming the bottom to level it out and packing gravel underneath,
you shim those
for more
rocks
stability,
with your hands under there. Oy.
We put another fish cave under here as well.
So this is important. A fish cave is to provide shelter for the fish, because what happens is if you have big koi and your pond is not designed well, wildlife can come in and kill your fish. There's birds, that's why they put a shelf there. You want to have a certain amount of foot deep, 2 feet deep for herons, blue herons if you have them in your area. Also raccoons will fish them out. Small ponds are hard to maintain. Bigger ponds are easier to maintain in some ways, but wildlife is a real deal. So you have to give a place for your fish to go. There's these overhangs, the fish have to go under those, or these fish caves for shelter.
Leveling off the gravel with the block wall was also important and will come into play later. We backfilled all of this with dirt before moving on.
It's a lot of dump trucks
to get a seamless look for the intake bay, we decided to use a tree. Luckily, there was a fallen oak tree in the woods that was perfect for the task. Tim chopped it down into use.
Yeah, you can have a tree in the woods, but how do you get your equipment there to move it? These things take a lot of men, and I think that you're not seeing how many guys are really here. I think they said 40 men.
Usable pieces that we slowly hauled out of the woods. And of course, we couldn't just drop it into the hole. We had to chop it down for the perfect fit. Adding stones and geotextile around this will ensure that the intake bay remains stable. I later locked the fabric in with stainless screws as well. We filled the void space around the aqua blocks with stones, not only to conceal them, but also to help filter the water. Additionally, putting flow cells on top of these will ensure that smaller stones don't enter the void space. Because of everything that we had to fix earlier, we also had to redo the skimmer. We continued setting rocks as before and rough plumbed with flex PVC. We ran it along the back of the pond behind the rocks from the skimmer. Along these, we connected various couplings and ball valves to create a system of jets for circulation.
So the jets for circulation is in some ponds there'll be still water, which the stagnation is not great. So they design in all these ways to move water around.
When connected to a pump later on, this will create jets that will ensure the pond doesn't have any dead spots. In case I didn't mention, this build is part of an educational event for Aquascape on training new CACs.
Certified aqua contractors, I think is what it is. If you dig a little deeper on the internet, everything is available. You can look up especially a company like this. Greg was featured, I think, on the cover of Forbes magazine one time as one of the fastest growing business entrepreneurs, and I think there was a dispute with his father. I read the lawsuit, it's public, and you can read about these terrible things that happen in family businesses behind the scenes. And he persevered, and his company is thriving again. But there's a mixed message online, and that is that there's a message to the customer. It says, you can have this beautiful pond and have the Aquascape lifestyle, I think he calls it, which is really alluring. But then on another part of their website, they're selling the services on how to build a pond to the contractors. And if you listen to the videos about their classes, they flat out say, this is so profitable. You can make a pond for so cheap and your gross profit will be this and this. And I'm like, well, I'm your customer. I don't want to see that.
We're building ponds just as a hobby. Started hearing some of the numbers you were spouting out that these guys were making, and I was just like, man, if these guys are making that money, I know I can make that kind of money. So
even in Cleveland, Tennessee.
I hit him up. He responded back by the end of the day, and I told my wife, I said, if this guy's really about what he's saying, I'm gonna go check all this out. As of right now, we're getting close to 6 figures we've done in water features, and I never even considered them in my life until this one.
Your profit margin is so dramatic for a pond construction. I mean, it's just a mixed message of saying, you can do this and buy our materials and be profitable. And then on this side, I'm like, am I gonna pay too much for this pond with these contractors? So it's a weird balance. Most people don't dig that deep into I just get fascinated. I was obsessive about wanting a pond. And when we moved to California, I'm building a very large pond, but very differently than this, because I've seen so many stories. There's stories about when they build the pond, and then there's stories about coming back to the owner of the pond 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later. Some contractors are very successful and their work holds, and others, they're just like, just throw the thing in the trash. Just get it out of my house, you know?
On this wall near where the waterfall is going to go to stabilize that. And with 40 of us, it should be an easy task to complete, but we'll see how it goes.
It was at this point that the build really kicked up and became a whirlwind. There was about 40 people, all doing different things at once. We accounted for the waterfall rocks, dug another trench for drainage, detailed the intake bay, strung lights throughout in key locations, attached the skimmer box to the liner.
I wonder if lights bother koi fish at night, you know? The lights are beautiful for us to view the fish, but is it this weird disruption for their brain?
And set more rocks. All the while it rained, but what do you expect? A feature I was really excited about was
40 people using the toilet.
I had been saving it for months, and this was the perfect spot for it. I should also mention that Tim dropped off a truck full of stumps a few days prior, which we finally started to incorporate now. We trimmed a bit off of this one to get a perfect fit. And while we're talking about driftwood, before I knew it, the boys were pulling the other end of that tree from earlier out of.
So if you had a really nice lawn and they're dragging a tree across it, now you have lawn repairs. But these are things that the people that are interested in ponds are accepting of the disruption that's coming, because the result is magnificent. But I would say build it 3 times bigger than you think you want it.
Of the woods. I did not expect that. The final features we were able to address before being rained out was some of the edge work and the section above the block wall. Using the paper technique from earlier, we checked the shape and used it as a guide to cut out flagstone.
Safety guy says, where are the goggles? Where's the headset? Are you kidding me? You got 40 guys on your property. He nicks his cornea. Who's liable for that? I'm like, where's the waiver? Legal.
The result was a perfectly seamless look.
If everything goes according to plan, this should be the final day of building. I hope that we don't get rained out, because last night we got a ton of it. It was kind of annoying, but I guess in some ways it may have worked out because it kind of rinsed off all of the rock work and everything like that. We'll certainly get more dirt in there, but as you can see, the water down the bottom is pretty dirty. So I'm running the pump right now before everybody comes to get that dirty water out of there, and the water should be here pretty soon.
Spoiler alert, we didn't finish on day 7, but it was an eventful day. It began with the placement of driftwood, followed by filling the basin. That said, I had to get in and fill.
So that water is most likely coming from a tanker truck. When like pool companies, they have these gas tankers, but they're full of fresh water, and they'll come in and so you can fill 10,000 gallons pretty quick rather than a garden hose, which is crazy.
Fill it myself because the water bubble returned. This occurred because there wasn't
with 2 drains,
to displace it.
40
Otherwise
professionals.
It would have ended up in the sump pit. This isn't quite how I imagined my first swim, but I had to get in there to redirect the water under the liner. We set up stock ponds.
He's laughing
to hold the
about
rest
it,
of the
but
water
I
till
wouldn't
later.
be.
Others prepped the patio area, ran more tubing for the pumps, and graded the hillside. We were also able to incorporate some of the plants, including a magnolia tree and a weeping cherry. I pulled a few hostas and ferns from elsewhere on my property as well. As hard as it was not to, I didn't go overboard just yet because I didn't want anything to get damaged.
It's fascinating to me, but he brings up a good point. He loves plants, and these ponds look great when they're landscaped. That's why I wanted to buy Greg's old house, as he had this landscaping, 20-year landscaping. It was mature, and it just was so enticing. But it takes a while to find the balance of a pond.
We were also able to finally excavate the wetlands filter. We lined the hole with geotextile just like the pond. That was followed up with EPDM liner, which I...
So you have a pond, you got to keep the water healthy. And the bog filter or wetland filter is a process to create healthy bacteria. Anyways, I'll talk about that.
Had to weasel my way out of. Of course, we put more fabric on this and assembled the pieces. This centipede and snorkel configuration creates an upflow biological system that breaks down sediments and cleans the water. We just had to hook it up to the pump, lock it in with some rocks, add a layer of aqua blocks, and finally more.
It sounds so simple when he's saying it, but look at all these guys. This is like a massive road construction thing here.
Or rocks. With that addressed, we could also move on to the waterfalls. After accounting for the shelves, we lined it all accordingly and placed the rocks. I had a very particular vision for the waterfalls, so it took a lot of work to get the stone placement just right. Details matter too.
Yeah.
Driftwood and moss greatly helped to soften and naturalize the appearance of the edges. We applied foam in key locations as well to ensure the flow of water goes over the rock. In the final stretch now, and things were finally falling into place. And luckily the rain gave us a break as well. The respite was great, but we were still getting stuck in the mud. This no doubt is one of the most unique elements
Who's feeding these 40 people? They're doing hard work. They must be hungry.
of the entire feature, a stump with a rock embedded into its roots. We ensured to showcase it right at the top of the waterfalls. Working well into the night, we continued to add moss, stumps,
Nobody wears
and
gloves.
gravel. And pro tip, getting into your work is key.
I had a shop for years, and I wouldn't wear gloves and my hands in chemistry, and I was dating a model at the time, and she's like, your hands, what? Don't touch me, you know? So how do you go home when you got these hands that are like bear claws, all damaged, and you touch your wife's cheek, and she's like, stand down, soldier.
For success. Something else I should have mentioned earlier is that when everyone found out that I like moss, they began collecting it from my yard. And before I knew it, I was finding different buckets full of moss waiting for me.
This is the beautiful part, is I think the people that build these ponds and enjoy them, it's a really neat tribe. They're all people that are sharing information, and that's great. Those are the people who are really invested in their pond construction versus me, who would have been a pond buyer, and I just wanted the result of it. These are people who are real outdoorsmen and women, and they know about fish, and they just love talking about it.
Although we weren't able to see the fruits of our labor just yet, ending the night with a light show was a close second. We were all burnt out by the final day, but there were only a few hours to complete the build.
Rain.
Everyone had flights booked for the afternoon, so we had to be done by then. The final segment of the tree was added to the wetlands, the plumbing was buttoned up, and I even pulled out the leftover aquatics from the DIY pond where I found a friend.
And we got a little friend in here, this frog, so we have a better home for him.
See, these guys love nature, every little piece of it. It's endearing. Shua! Come on, buddy.
As we added the remainder of the water, we continued doing edge work, topped off the wetlands filter with small gravel, finished the rock work in the waterfall, and finally let the water rip.
That's
it took
8
about
hours.
10 minutes before it made its way through, but seeing this is always so satisfying. We just had to add a few smaller rocks and chip the edge of the bottom one for optimal flow. Till then, we had been laboring through less than ideal conditions, and everyone was tired. Seeing this was the morale boost that everyone
looks small,
needed,
doesn't it?
And we continued to the very end. It was fitting too that one of the last rocks we set was that giant one from earlier. It, along with the few accent
Usually they have drone footage. I don't know why. Maybe the weather, someone wasn't flying a drone. This guy has a lot of really great information on his YouTube channel. We'll be sure to feature it. But also the Aquascape website, as much as I was saying my personal experience was less than great, they are absolutely dedicated to education and accessibility for people building ponds. I don't know of another company that does it to the level that they provide, that you could choose to interact with. Greg Whitstock is traveling all over the country to film these different ponds, and I got a lot of personal intel on him, but anyways.
Just as we set those, everyone took a final look at the waterfall, we said our goodbyes, and the team dispersed. In the days after, the rain finally let up, and I was able to work on the landscape in peace. I did get a few new plants, but most of these are actually...
This guy can't have a normal job, right? This channel has to be his job in order to do this.
From my old house, one of which is very special to me, MJ's tree. My late American bullfrog, who I had for 14 years, passed away back in 2020. I put him under this tree at that time, but I couldn't leave it at the old house. When I pulled it out last year, I found his remains, which are now being returned to their rightful spot under this tree. I placed the statue as well when I realized that we had another friend in the mix. Frogs are very special to me. Not only are they my favorite animals, but they're literally the reason why I do.
Didn't he say his wife and he bought a house? Where's the wife? Pond is absolutely, maybe she's the one paying for this. If you marry a pond guy, get ready.
do what I do.
It's
Everything
obsessive.
began with frogs. So
He's
with
cute.
MJ as part of this feature, along with the new ones calling this home, it was a very special moment to say the least. Alongside these plants, I mulched and added a few aquatics that I got from my mom's pond I built earlier this year.
Now you have the sound of the water. It's going to attract. This is the thing, is once the pond is built, you've created an ecosystem for all of this nature to find their way to your house. The birds, the frogs, the different variety of insects, the dragonflies. You have just created this light well of life force. It's fantastic. But they're also noisy. My neighbors have a pond, and you can hear that pump running. And the waterfall, which is beautiful, you need a variable speed motor because you want to turn you need the waterfall for water circulation. But when you have a big party, you turn the waterfall on really heavy and it pours all this water, but it's so noisy.
That all happened over the past few weeks, with the date of completion being 8 days ago from when I'm uploading this. The water has cleared up significantly and will continue to do so over the following weeks. Although you did see me address some of the detail work, there's a lot more to address. In all honesty, we simply ran out of time because of weather setbacks. So I still have to address cord management, the autodoser needs installed, the flagstone patio and upper seating areas are incomplete, and this giant pile of dirt will become part of the hillside, to name a few. Even so, I did take the time to add plants. And I'm sure you could imagine that I wanted to add more, but I just have to accept that this will be an ongoing process. I have to think of this all several years in the future as a mature landscape. Most of these perennials will grow much larger and help create the aesthetic I have in mind. All things considered though, I think it looks great right now. Anyway, this is roughly an 8,000 gallon ecosystem swim pond that's 5 feet deep. The water is pulled into this area, which is called an intake bay. There's a skimmer that skims the water's surface and a pond vault that pulls water through the rocks. From here, pumps send water up into the wetlands filter, which is essentially a giant upflow bog.
Yeah, it's
Bacteria
important.
colonies within the rocks will process the water alongside robust plant growth. Now, it's not that robust right now because I only have a few items, but in time it will be completely filled with plants. From there, the water cascades down through the falls and eventually into the pond, creating an ongoing loop.
I mean, what a way, if you have kids, young kids, to have them learn about nature. I mean, there's the safety issues, right? Teach your kids how to swim, but this idea of them being interactive, they're basically at school at their own backyard. It's fantastic.
Stated, I had a very specific vision for this design. I wanted to mimic the types of waterfalls and creeks that I saw growing up as a kid. The features around me typically consist of pooling areas with wide blade waterfalls like these. The cool thing is that nearly everything we used to capture the essence of that was sourced locally, not only from PA, but my backyard itself. And yes, I really did just go and build an 8,000 gallon pond for feeder goldfish. The original 20 or so that I bought, most of which I still have to this day, were all feeder fish. I dismantled their pond almost a year ago, and they've been living in a stock tank ever since. Of course, that includes little Petey, who is not so little anymore. I know that many of you would expect and want me to add koi, but I prefer to just have my goldfish alongside something smaller like darters. I think all of these will look much better against the scale of the pond than massive koi. That said, I'm not going to add these just yet because I want the pond to become established first. When I look back on this all, I remember it very clearly. Although you get a rough idea from this video, I can't understate how much work was involved. As we labored through this, I made sure that I was a part of nearly every aspect of the build. I want to look back on all of this and the pond itself, knowing that I played a crucial role in its creation. That said, I can't express enough how grateful I am to everyone else who helped make this possible. From my friends at Aquascape, including Ed, Chris, and Trevor, and to all the certified Aquascape contractors. I can't imagine how long it would have taken me to make something like this without all of you. It's very humbling to know that all of these people traveled and dedicated their time to help make this dream a reality. There's something special about working toward a common goal that builds camaraderie, and I made a lot of new friends through this process.
See, that's the other part, is as a pond buyer, I want the pond. But as a pond builder, they have all these people to go to for information when their pond isn't working. The people that ended up buying Greg's old house contracted Aquascape to take care of it, and they had some iffy experiences with that. It was very frustrating for them, the response times and things like this. And also I think Greg sold that house when he wasn't quite emotionally ready to let go of it, because he was always like, well, how am I gonna get to my pond? But we used to go over there with a bunch of kids and feed the ducks, and it was really fantastic. But the people that are involved in these ponds are very emotional about nature. There's people who just want to build it for the money, but I feel like they won't stay in the business very long. You really have to love the land to do something like this. And the difficulty is, as a pond buyer, is I won't know if somebody's really good at what they do, because they can show me pictures of what they did, but I don't know if it's correct underneath. I just don't know. It's a crapshoot. And the guy that came out as a very expensive pond builder, I asked him, I said, can you show me another pond that you built like this before? And he's like, I haven't built one this big before. I was like, red flag, you know? It's fabulous what they do. But I chose this video to show how much work, manual labor, a pond is to make. And even with experts, there were mistakes made, corrections that had to be adjusted for based on the weather, based on the particular landscape. And also these pros that were there, like Ed, he doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, he's on big sites elsewhere. But the way that I would have done this differently, if I was engaging in a pond company that said, give me $500 or $1,000 and I'll come out and see your pond, I say, I'll give you $200. You come out and do the pond, and then I'll pay you the rest when I get my estimate and plans. Not plans, but it's just a simple sketch to show what they have in mind. And then I would hire them in the next phase to do only the design work. I would not commit to the entire pond project with one company until I see what it's like to work with them in the front. So I'd buy the visit, then I would pay for the plans, and then I would talk about construction. I would also talk about warranty work, who fixes things, what the, and you have to, with warranties, people can say they offer them, but you never get them because they don't come back and they don't show up, or you have to wait for some schedule. And like Greg's house, owners had a $150,000 sump pump put in their house so the water didn't migrate into this house that they built. That's a funny story, but ponds are beautiful. I'm thumbs up for ponds, but I don't know how to overcome all of these challenges. I'm gonna build a cement pond. I'm basically gonna hire pool builders and build a self-cleaning pool, but that is gonna be for koi, because I want this stuff to come around and flow and create circulation. We'll use a bog filter on a concrete build, and also we'll put organic rocks in there, so it won't look like a swimming pool. Swimming pools aren't so pretty to stare at after a while. They're not nature interactive, but I want the durability of a concrete gunite build, and the shotcrete gunite, whatever you want to call it. And these liners I worry about, because landscaping affects these liners. You could have roots that go in and under, and by the time you have a 20-year mature landscape, what's happening with that liner? EPDM is supposed to be very durable, but I don't know that it's absolutely foolproof. The house that Greg owned has sold again, and the new owners, who I'm not friends with, they're kind of secretive. I just see the water level going down and down and down. It's like they're not taking care of it. Either they don't care, they don't want it. I can't figure it out. But ponds are a lifetime commitment. It's difficult to vacation. You have to have people. Your pumps can't go out. If your pump goes out, you're in big trouble. So what do I want to say? That was my closing on ponds. Is I love them, but you got to research up and get ready to spend some money, because it is like a whole nother level to your house. It's not a fountain, it's not a water feature. It is an element, a water element. So I'm gonna do it though.